feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas. And the ladies.
There we are.
he is. I was waiting for
Just
him.
a little alley-oop.
I didn't know
Just a
if he was.
little
I didn't know if he was going to jump in there. Welcome back to another episode of The Farm. Got our boy Cody back on the mic. What's up, my dog?
Hey, just living the dream, baby. We back. Kicked me off for a few episodes, but
Yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah,
All
you know,
good.
I got tired of all your questions. God,
That's
Cody.
fine. That's fine.
No, but speaking of that, we were sitting here talking about what the podcast was going to be today, and then you started rattling off a couple things, and then you had some things that got me fired up. So I was like, let's talk about it. What
Yeah.
you got?
So personally, too, we're going to go off personal experience. So been posting some stuff on my personal account and everything as well.
Go ahead and drop that for the people.
Yeah, so just Cody Martin, KODEEMARTIN. Just
Hey,
classic.
somebody called you Cody with a C the other day.
I know.
And even too that, you know how it auto on
Loser.
Instagram where it does the captioning for you?
Oh,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
said I was talking to you and it said Cody and then it popped up with a C and I'm like, wow.
bro.
I was like upset that Instagram didn't know how like cool your name was.
No, it's actually funny. A lot of people's autocorrect to loser. Like my sister, when she texts me,
Loser?
types, loser. So
Class.
you type in my name, KO, it goes to loser.
That's
so
funny.
yeah, no, it's I'm over it now. But at first, it was pretty hurtful. But
Dang.
but
Don't
yeah,
trying to play with you, bro.
I know, right? But no, just posting not quite as much, going out there as like the farm account, of course, but some stuff here and there. And I had someone, funny enough, on YouTube posting
There it
YouTube
is.
shorts.
Hey, the
And,
haters don't stay on one
hey,
Instagram or Twitter.
I know, I got-
they migrate.
Yeah, I got like 7 people subscribed to my YouTube, and I already got haters.
And it's like,
dog.
well, hey, it's just like I always tell Nicole, hey, you got to find another way to get 3 more haters this week.
Hey,
You know what I'm
right?
saying? So,
Right? So
yeah.
so we're on YouTube. Some guy comments something. We're doing open 45 with an angle machine, from offset angle to opposite field.
yeah,
And I believe the caption was
comment.
well, my caption to it was like feeding the mistake, working on like staying through the ball, right?
Got it.
And the guy commented was
simplistic.
like, this guy was like, how is he staying through the ball? I've never seen a big league hitter do this drill before.
Open 45s.
Yeah, open 45. I've never seen a big league hitter do this drill before or swing like this.
Interesting.
And, I comment, I'm like, hey, it's like, appreciate you reaching out. This is actually a drill. It's called Open 45. It's challenging, some direction. He is in an open stance. We are also challenging him by the angle of the machine, being offset because he likes to, like pull his shoulder, yank with the back, stand up out of posture, a lot of these things. And so, and then also too works on barrel entry, which, tends to struggle with, drags the barrel and et cetera. So I do that, and he was like, take a slow-mo video of any big leaguer, like he'll never land open like this. And I was like, to reinforce, like this is a drill, we are working on something. And then he was just like, where do you guys learn these drills from? And I just commented, I was like, there's a lot of drills out there, that me personally, I've heard from multiple hitting coaches that have all worked with very high-level hitters. And then also, too, I continue to, hold myself accountable by asking people above me.
Cody's too nice.
I'm very professional. I
Cody's
tried.
too nice, yeah.
And so I was like, I check myself with people that have worked with very high-level hitters, like you, I didn't name drop, or, I've hit with former coaches that are currently big league hitting coaches or, bench coaches. I'm like, I've been around some pretty high level people. And then also too, we have access to information that no one has with, and then name dropped all the tech, Rapsodo, Blast, KVest, 4D, Swing Cat, Vertec force plates. I was like, so blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, but I completely understand, the question, yada, yada, yada. And he goes, well, to be honest, I think you're full of it. I think you're making stuff up. I don't understand your credentials, nor do I believe you and whatever you say. And I was just like, that's fine, dude. I was just like, I used to feel the same way about a lot of stuff. But as I've surrounded myself with, pretty high level hitting coaches, that challenge the way I think, I've kind of grown too. I was just like, but overall, just, continue to post my experiences and what I feel has helped. You know, and then two is like, I always try to learn from other hitting coaches online as well. And so I'm looking forward, and this is where I got a little petty. It's like, so I'm looking forward to see you post some of your hitters so I can learn from you as well.
Cody's good, too.
No posts,
Yeah.
no followers,
Of course.
no profile picture once
Of course.
again. So 2 for
Yeah.
2 on that one. And then he doesn't respond.
Of course.
And so the question came about, and then too, ironically, I'm watching this podcast, and some, you know, influencers from today's age that have millions and millions of subscribers. They actually did a podcast where he was mentioning how he doesn't do a very good job responding to things that are said about them and how they run their business. And he said, you know, there's a lot of negative stories out there because we don't respond to drama. We don't want to be involved with drama. But he's like, you know, the first person that usually says something controls the narrative. And so all these assumptions out here, you know, that are being thrown our way, like people start to believe some of them because we don't respond. You know, and he's like, we don't do a very good job of doing that. And that's something that, you know, I've recognized is like, you know, I don't want to be drama filled, but also too, is like, at this point with the millions of subscribers we have and followers, like I feel like it's our duty to continue to protect the people in our company and like, the brand that we've built. We don't want people making up stories or having misinformation spread. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then he also mentioned too, how hard he handles. They've stopped posting as consistently because as they've grown rapidly, he gets a lot more hate comments.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know, I've handled it very poorly and like it affects me every day. Like there's sometimes I literally will not post in a month because I'm so bothered by the comments that are being said and like the people personally attacking like my credibility and everything. And so I just thought it was really interesting, and I was curious as you, who's obviously has a pretty big following in the baseball space and has had your fair share of comments towards you and at you, to like what level do you think you know there's a sense of responsibility to answer some of these, and then also too from a professionalism standpoint, like you also don't want to come off as the guy that, you know, nobody likes and the enemy, even though sometimes people love the enemy in stories, but you know, you have a business that you're building and you have a brand that you also want to protect, like, and two, it's like you don't want to spread this false narrative of who you are, like you're not that guy, you know, that, you know, just wants people to hate you by any means too. And so like to what degree do you feel responsible of responding to some of these, you know, when to respond, how to respond to a lot of these people that come on that, you know, they may just not have the experience that you have. And so their understanding is that of you maybe 10 years ago when you first started, right?
For sure.
And so having that understanding that, you know, maybe they're just a different part in their career where they don't understand, but also too, like, where do you give your energy and decide, you know, because some people just get on there and they want to argue, you know? So.
Yeah, no, the reason I wanted to do podcasts about this, because specifically you might be thinking like, oh, I'm a coach. What does that have to do with posting? Well, first off, if we want to push the game forward, like we need to post. Like everybody needs to share ideas, collaborate, all those things. And also too, there's a large grouping of coaches that do post and a large grouping of coaches that don't post because they're scared. And also too, don't want to deal with the BS and all the things that come along with it. So one of the first things I think is along with it is like you need to know before you open your mouth about anything in person, whatever, you open yourself up to criticism. It just is what it is. We talked about this on when Jarrell and I did a podcast where we talked about the two different types of they're going over two different types of news anchors, where they're talking about on one of the news anchors is like your local news anchor, where they're talking about, you know, they're just regurgitating information, is no personal opinion. Everything is just regurgitation of information. And then there's also the other side where there's somebody like, you know, like, Chris Tucker or something like that from, I think that's his name, right, from Fox or something. I don't know. You know, I don't watch news that much.
Yeah.
Anyways, like him, and also too, like there's these guys that obviously express their own opinion. Obviously, some of it is still regurgitated, whatever, but they have their own takes on things. Those type of guys, obviously you're going to get strong each way, right? There's going to be a whole bunch of people that watch CNN that hate the guy from Fox, and a whole bunch of people watch Fox that hate the guy from CNN. But they don't have as strong of feelings for like their local news anchor. They don't feel that way. In general, they might actually have positive things. Generally with somebody like that, they've been following, for 15 years, I've gotten like the guy's just telling you what the weather's going to be today. He's not telling you that you should go get your kids vaccinated and you should, President Biden is this or, Trump is that or what, again, and they're just giving out information, right? And they're not picking out one or another along with it, or again, even if there is an agenda, it's not theirs. They're just the employee that's hired to put out this stuff, right? So, anyways, it's kind of harder to get mad at them in that same way, right? They're just doing their job, just like if your job is to sell, I don't know, at a convenience store to sell the food that's in the store. It's not your food. You're just there ringing it up, right? You're just doing your job. So I think there's some of those things, which obviously there's some things along with that. I also think on the same thing is one of the words that was really big for me as I started to build my following like pretty rapidly in the last, I'd probably say really like 6 to 8 months when I like quadrupled my following. A lot of that obviously was driven by algorithm of like Instagram and like what it was making a push for Reels at the time, competing with TikTok. And even too, people on TikTok, like like Rich, for example, like he grew his following to like 200,000 people in like a very short time frame of doing so. Along with that, that's going to open your, obviously you have videos that are getting 8 million views and, he's got certain videos that are, it's Aaron Judge. So he's going to get quite a bit of views. I mean, he's like one of the top names in baseball right now. So you're going to get a lot of that as well. So I think that's one of the things, but one of the things that really hit me during that time, because I was also, this also like more of like a new age question. It's not, we just aren't built for that much feedback. And so I listened to quite a few things because it did start to interrupt my creative process because I was just so worried about being like perfect and like how I said things and how to come off this way. And then someone's going to say this and someone's going to say that and all this stuff. And I really didn't understand early on is, I used to always hear when Gary Vee would kind of start talking about this mentality of you're not posting as much as you could be posting and because it comes from a place of like perfectionism, but behind perfectionism is insecurity. And because of insecurity, I think is the real thing of what we're talking about here is like the real root of insecurity. And then everybody, I've also been refreshed with this lately, is the idea that first off, people take the word like insecure, like it's like a knife, like, oh, you're insecure. You're like, yes, we're all insecure on certain, and again, insecure, it's not insecure check or I'm not insecure check, right? It's like to what degree on what, like, again, for example, if you had 100 people saying something that you were wrong about something, could you handle that? Right? Some people are like, yeah, sure, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Some of you, okay, listen, don't lie, bro. I've seen you with 5 bad comments and all of a sudden you lost your brain. All right. So again, there's a difference between 5 people, 100 people, 100,000 people, 100 million people, right? That are all saying like, how much negativity can you take on that side? And how many people that naysayers can you take? Haters can you take on the same things? And I think, it's more useful as an opportunity that I've kind of learned on that same way is like it's an opportunity there to really give you awareness more than anything of like where you are like in your character and where you are as a human of like what's important to you and like what you're letting in and what you're not letting in. And don't be saying like this isn't a check mark for me. It's like I'm so amazing at this, but I know when I'm in a really good heart condition place and where I'm at is by how I see a lot of these comments. Now, this doesn't mean your typical response, which is what somebody is saying, I think, along with it, is like I have a little bit of a different take than I would say like necessarily from like, Gary Vee or some of these other dudes. And what I mean by that is like Gary Vee usually has this extremely empathetic response where it's like, again, kind of very similar. Like they're probably early on in their thought process. They don't know those things. Like I understand, I have empathy. Like I have empathy, but I also have accountability, right? And what I mean by that is like, I have empathy that you don't know these things and you might be where I was 10 years ago, but also 10 years ago, I wasn't a dick. Like when I responded to somebody on social media and doing whatever. And if I did, and he lit me up, like good, like I was being a dick and I didn't understand something. And so like, there's the other thing of being like, again, I don't care if you disagree with what I'm talking about. There's no reason for you to come on my social media and say, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. Where does your credibility come from? When in reality of being like, be a human being, bro. Right? Be a human being. Hey, I'm having a problem with understanding this drill, right? And how it's applicable for XYZ. Can you help me understand? Boom. It's a different conversation, right? And that's where it's actually funny because typically what I've learned over the years, like in the beginning, I would have with guys where, again, some guy would say some comment like that. I know from your initial comment of what you said back to me was because it would get spun sometimes, right? Like a guy would say something like that, then I would respond super respectfully or whatever. And then he's still, coming X, Y, he's still coming at me or whatever.
Yeah.
So then I'd go the opposite way, right? And the guy lights me up, then I light him back up, right? But also answer what he's saying. And then he would say, well, you don't gotta be X, Y, and Z, right? You da-da-da. And I'm like, bro, did you look at your original comment that you said to me? Like, look what I'm responding to. Let's not take this out of context. Like I came from left field and just hit you with a right hook, right? Like you gotta understand like where I'm coming from with this. Like don't all of a sudden try to play victim here, right? Because I proved you to be an asshole, right? Like don't be a dick.
And so yeah, he had the power in the conversation when he started it, and that's where I was saying like almost in a sense sometimes they can control that narrative and almost like make people view you a certain way.
Well, that's why I always like, but I also think like, for example, on the same way as along with it, like one of the things you'll see me do a lot is somebody will be like, you're an idiot. You know what you're talking about? This drill will never work. And I'll respond back and I'll be like, are you sure? Like I immediately flip back, like who's asking the questions? In reality, there's truth to that is the first person that says something, they can try to control the narrative, but then I flip it back, and the same thing too. Like, again, I'm not underneath investigation review here, right? It's very easy to try to poke holes. Again, it's much easier. It's like that tweet I said with me and Bobby talked about it when me and his podcast where he talked about it's like, it's so much, oh man, I'm going to pull it up because I don't want to mess it up. I sent him such a good quote on this. So I'm reading this book and I thought that this was, it was actually me and Bobby both have a book that we're reading together. And one of the things, I sent him in this book. I was like, man, like it's one of the biggest takeaways that I actually had from it was just how they argued and how they went about debating. And again, people don't even like the word argue. They don't like to debate. All these people that are not controversial in that same way or like are trying to avoid, confrontation is what I was going for, right? So anyway, so I sent this, I think was a pretty good quote that it made me, like a highlight for me that I thought was pretty big for me. So it was like fire nugget here. This is what I told him. I was like fire nugget. third page in. It's like, it's always easier to prove a false theory false than it is to prove a true one true. So it is reasonable to have more beliefs about what you think is false than about what you think is true. It's a sign of a healthy critical mind. So what I mean by that is like why that was so grasping for me is like, for example, it's so much easier to try to poke holes in what I'm talking about than it is to state a true statement. And so like at the end of all of that, right, you say, hey, like post your own hitters, post your own opinion, because right now you're only critiquing my opinion, right? So it's so much easier to try to, again, try to prove my theory false, right? And try to poke all these holes in it than it is to actually state your opinion and actually add something to this conversation,
Right.
rather than just critique it the whole time and say, what are your credibility? How do you know? Blah, blah, blah. And again, I think that that's also too, in the same way of like how in any way we get attacked is like, again, and also, me from like a faith background, like for me, it's like the same story of how the devil attacks us constantly, right? And when you go into that and you go into like how the Bible actually talks through about how you're going to be attacked, one of the main things is, again, like it's that that feeling of, and again, take the meat, leave the bones here. Again, just take the wisdom from the Bible if you don't believe in that same way. It's just the wisdom in the same sense of one of the main things that it's going to be attacked is that identity is always going to be attacked, right? Who are you, the position that you actually sit in, right? So one of the big things that really helped me is one of the big places from there. And again, this was not from the Bible, but again, a verse or a quote that I always kind of stick to is actually from, I forgot who it was, some pastor rap artist, but he was talking on a podcast and he was talking about like being tricked out of your position. Like, and again, that's biblical. If you take back the wisdom to that, is again on that as being tricked out of your position. And so I obviously when I kind of look at that as like, hey, like again, someone's trying to trick me out of my position. And so how I've been like filtering through those things is just understanding like along with it is there's this this constant thing like I need to prove my credibility to you. Like why? For what? Like obviously you established in your head that I wasn't credible the moment that you watched my thing and then doubted everything I'm going to say. There's nothing, if I'm ever in a position where I'm having to prove my value or credibility to somebody, I've already lost. Right. And what I mean by that is like, that's not the way that I'm going to gain credibility. So on the opposite end of that is the same thing too, is like, I flip script. Like I'm not trying to prove to myself or you that I'm credible. Like by me posting, right, and giving out information, first off, this wasn't a credibility post. This wasn't for me to prove anything to you. This is me sharing information. So along with that, like mindset wise, like I usually, again, like one of my first, tactics, a lot of things that I, again, along with that, with like not necessarily is to spin the conversation of being like, but like, are you sure? Like immediately planning the same thing too. Like that question is rattling when you really think about it. When someone is talking with like such conviction and they're so sure you're wrong, like I'll flip it back around. It's like, are you sure? Like, are you sure? Right. And that also makes them think again, like, are you sure this doesn't work? Because again, the same thing too, like I've never seen a pro guy. I'll post a pro guy right now. I'll post 10 that have done open 45s that I have on my phone. I have, again, and I can find within the next 10 minutes, right? Like, especially because we train them. So that being the step point. And then also on top of that as well is like, that, like in your heart, like, that, right? So like, I think one of the big things is also the development of like confidence that you build over time. And it's just like, when a player's young, it's important for them to play against, to go against strong adversity, and not only go against strong adversity, but also go against strong adversity and lose, strong adversity and also win, and also know that they can overcome these things and like keeping, holding on to these principles. And I think one of the big things for me is as I continue to develop confidence in that same way, is that my confidence doesn't come from what that other person thinks on the other side, right? And so what I mean by that is like the same thing too as well, is that when I come from a place that the person on the other side of the phone has to think I'm credible, or has to think I'm smart, or has to think that I do these other things, well, again, that's something that's more going on with me than has anything to do that's what's going on with them. And so they're going to say these things. Everybody's going to say these things. Somebody might, question, whatever that is. And again, along with that is like, it's obviously everything's independent, but I think the root thing that everybody can pull from that is like a foundation of understanding, like, where does, your credibility come from? And if you're going from like the information I know, even to like in some of the things that I would like, I would even position with you is like the people, the name drop, kind of like some of those things as well, is just being like, well, first off, along with it, like if it right is right, no matter who said it. Right. And yeah. Thank you.
$35.15.
Good. Nicole, can you do me a favor? Can you close that door? It's one more layer of stuff. Yeah.
Cool.
Huh? What? Yeah, we're good. I just wanted to close it. And so one of the big things is, right is right no matter who said it. It doesn't matter. If it's truth, it's truth. I don't care if it came from a first-year hitting coach or if it came from a 90-year veteran hitting coach. Like, it doesn't matter who said it. If it's right, it's right. So at the end of the day, again, obviously someone can depict if they think it's right, if they think it's not right, or whatever those things are. But again, also too, just because somebody's 70 and been coaching for 40 years doesn't mean that it's right either. It could be wrong. It could have been wrong for 40 years. Like, and there's plenty of things that we find all the time that are wrong, that why someone thought something happened and what's the actual science behind it. And like, does it actually create what we think? So I think it's from the other thing as well, is like when you come from a foundation of like, again, along with it, like, I think on the other side of that is within that interaction is like, they're not trying to be your friend.
Right.
They're immediately with that. Like, there's some things like along with that is like, they're not trying to be your friend within that comment. So a lot of times, like when a guy does that, I don't respond obviously to a ton of people that obviously comment. There's not really a big purpose, because even if you could present every bit of data you could present every bit of science, you could name drop all you want, you could do all these other things. They have an emotional blockage, right? That is blocking them from understanding this information or even wanting to understand this information. One of the best ways also too for people to consume your information is like, great, you disagree with me, great, you'll keep digging. And if not, fine. Like, again, there is also credibility in the sense of me not responding, because again, on the same sense of that is like, I don't need to respond to any of you, right? I don't have a sense of it that I need to. A lot of times if I can use it for to create content or to educate, well then again, a lot of times I'll respond to those comments. Or on the opposite sense of that, there's certain ones, like for example, like I just had a guy comment, yesterday or something like that on an old post too, something that we posted like months ago. Somebody had mentioned, he's like, I've trained, 2 all-stars, MLB all-stars, and we never did this, or they never talked about this, or something along those lines. And I'm like, okay, well, again, I'm responding back to him like, well, I've trained multiple MLB All-Stars as well. And also too, with that being said, like we did do these things, right? And also again, like one of the main things I say this is like stay curious. Like I think from that other thing is like, I don't have anything to prove to you. And again, that's great. If you don't believe my content, good, push your content. Like post all the things about where I'm wrong, feel free to post your own stuff, educate your own thing. Again, like you've heard me tell that to people too. Yeah. Build your own business, build your own following, get your own people, and talk about whatever you want to talk about. But on my platform, right, on my page, that you happen to a lot of times be following, right, and you're trying to use my audience to build your following, right? Like I know the game like you're trying to play, and again, like there's a time and a place where I'm going to respond. Time and place where I'm not going to respond. And again, if you're finding identity in those comments, like, again, it's going to be hard to obviously build. And I think, I actually had, and this is a big thing. Like I've had a notable coach reach out to me recently that has a substantial following, like mine times a lot, like a very big following, millions of people. Right. And that coach actually reached out to me and was like, hey, like, I haven't posted on social media about hitting in quite a while, and more it's been switched to mindset because I just can't handle like these people all attacking in the same way. And so one of the resources I handed out to them was Michael Todd came out with a series was called Cuffed, and one of the things in there was one of the sermons was on cuffed to the comments. And like it's not about just social media, that is obviously a big place where we're going to receive comments, but also too on just in life of being like cuffed to those, like what people think and what people say and what they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think on the same sense as like some practical things that you can go inside of there is, again, also remain curious about yourself, in the same sense of being like, I get curious, like when someone comments like that of like questioning my credibility or something like that, sometimes I have realizations. And I think I told you this the other day, is like I was sitting inside a AAA baseball game a little while back, and I was like looking around the stadium, and like I'm also listening to people around me and how they're talking about baseball and like what's happening and why, and like listening to the dad in front of me talk to his kid about like what's going on and like teaching his son and all those other things. And I think there's this dichotomy that's like so interesting in the same way, is like, it's beautiful, the dad down there teaching his son the game because it's passing the game along, right? But also within that, like it's not perfect. What he's saying is not 100% accurate, right? There is a lot of representations of like what's actually happening in baseball and like why guys are doing what. And again, it's also not the same thing too. It's just like, it's just also an opinion, right? Like we really got to remember is like someone's opinion from their experience and truth, right? And in any opinion, there's always a little bit of truth, right? But it's probably misconstrued, twisted, all those other things. Like, again, we're not always seeing the full reality. So when you see it from both sides, it's like, hey, like, I'm not trying to prove to you I'm right. I'm sharing with you my opinion. Now, if you disagree with my opinion, that's fine. And I actually hope you continue to do so, right? And that you think about all my things all the way through. But for me, in my house, we will continue to worship the Lord. But for me in my house, like, again, like this is what's important to us. This is why. And again, you might disagree with me again with that thought process of you teach karate, I teach Muay Thai, right? Or I teach, jiu-jitsu, and we're just teaching different techniques. And of course, you have a different way of working on this, like awesome. But specifically, like I said, in that interaction, a lot of times, I think on the same way is like along with it is like, I know their intention before we have the conversation. So when they comment, they're making it well and clear what their intention is. And typically when someone comments, like, again, like even when I comment on somebody, like, yeah, but don't you think that possibly da 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 da? And it's like, oh, you wanted to have a conversation. Now, if you wanted to have a conversation, I'm way more likely to have responses back with you. Not always. I can't respond to everybody. But if somebody wants to have a conversation, well, then you're probably going to get a conversation back. But if you want to make an accusation or, again, like you're immediately trying to battle, well, I mean, again, that's also, too, there's something back, that you're probably going to get back responsibly from that. But I also, again, I think one of the main things that I think, for you and as you continue, and again, I think the same things that you're talking about is like a lot of people that are initially posting and especially building up their own account is you're also going to get some responses a lot more from your own personal account because some of these guys will comment on mine.
Yeah.
And then they just comment and keep scrolling.
Right.
But then I comment back and they click on my page and they go to my page and it's like MLB hitting consultant, CEO, da 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 da, and then they see my credentials and then they're like, then the guy, that same dude that I responded to the other day, then he DMs me and he's like, hey man, I was trying to understand. Da, da, da. I'm like, oh, okay. Like now you want to have a conversation, right? So I think in some of those, like for you specifically, like in the same thing as like more of a younger coach, which again, a long times too, even if you're not a younger coach, maybe you just started the post, right? Is some of the takeaways there is like, first off is to stay curious about yourself, just like they should be, as an audience member, you need to be very curious. And I think there's two things that we'll unpack here as well is one, how should you be interacting with someone when you want to learn more and you're an audience member? And then two, how you handle it when you're on the opposite side and you're the poster. So I kind of want to unpack those separately. So we'll stay with the coaching one for now. Is that from a coaching standpoint is when you're just newly posting, one of the things that you got to limit, it's just like being on the field. All that noise doesn't matter. You could have 100 bad comments on every post that you put out. Great. The algorithm's going to love you. They're going to promote your thing's going to get posted all over the place. People are talking about your stuff. Like, great. Every time, and we talk about this all the time, every time, Jeffrey Fry, Teacher Man, any of these guys, like, again, along with them, right? They comment on my stuff or post my stuff. Like, we make more money. Like, they literally on the same thing, like our marketing numbers, our sales numbers spike every time one of them posts about, some of our content. And like, it's awesome, right? Like, cool. Like, I don't really care on the same side. Now, there's some different things that, again, obviously we do as well when people are, stealing your stuff or posting your, posting personal information about you or something like that. Then like, yeah, there's different ways. And again, like there's strict, IP laws and things like that. There's, again, you're literally stealing, intellectual property. Like, yeah, then you can respond there. But again, that's more like a legal route or something like that. A different subject. But again, along with that, like if they're talking about you, good. Like that's why you're posting content. And again, along with it, if you're posting content, not wanting anybody to say anything about you, it's like, okay, well, again, like how many people disagree with Stephen A. Smith constantly, right? How many people disagree with whoever, right? It doesn't matter who it is, right? Again, along with that, why is Rich's Instagram or, TikTok blown up so much? Because people disagree with them. And because people disagree with them, it also brings in an audience of a whole bunch of people that are interested and also that he disagree with. He's polarizing, right? And so like he's going to draw people to him. Great. Like I get it. I get why he builds a following along with it. And it's also what you want to be, for be in that same way. But you're not going to post things and people not say anything. Like, of course we're talking about things, especially then that one's pretty like an open 45 off of a machine is crazy. Yeah. But at the same time, it is a step up from like front toss or tee or something like that, where it's a higher progression. Those guys might not do it. But like when you get into that realm, for example, it's like well, usually I'm posting something because generally the audience is going to find it valuable because it does not agree with typical thought process in the time
methodology,
in the space. So if I'm posting something that I know is alternative to what everybody else thinks,
Right.
and then thinking I'm going to get no responses from the get-go, right? Because I know when I post something that's a little,
Edgy.
it's edgy, right? That's going to be controversial, right? That people are going to respond. And like, I know that before posting. And like some people obviously, again, like that guy you're talking about, he knows before they're posting that, again, it's going to get some responses. But again, like, so what are you doing it? And I think the other part, again, going back to biblical wisdom again, if you're in search of trophies and accolades and affirmation from humans, right? Well, that's exactly what you're going to get. And again, again, I don't know the Bible verse off the top of my head, but again, God's saying that. And rather than again, like, and again, somebody's probably thinking like, well, yeah, like that's I'm building a funnel. I want people to think highly of me. I want these other things.
Right.
And I'm like, but that's why you're losing. And that's why you care so much. And that's why you can't post. And that's why you can only post when people think good things about you and say that you're awesome and you're smart and all these other things. How about this? Is this a new thing? How about when Albert Einstein came out with a theory of relativity? How many people disagreed? How many scientists didn't agree with him? How many people told him he was an idiot? How many people told him like that he had no idea what the hell he was talking about? How many people like all these other things? And then generations later, and they're like, oh, he was well before his time and all these other things. Yeah. You know what well before his time looks like? When you're actually in the moment, everybody disagreeing with you, telling you like, oh yeah, actually we revolve around the sun. The sun doesn't revolve around us. Oh, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Like, again, this was from science and ideas from the beginning of time. So I do think on the same way. And I think on the same way, for me personally, one of the gifts that I felt like God had given me is I've always been okay with arguing with somebody, right? And that's where, like, for example, me and Taylor talk about this all the time too, because Taylor's the opposite, right? Like Taylor doesn't really want to argue. Now, don't get me wrong, like boundaries and other things of like having conversations when they need to happen. But at the same time, like, I literally in college, Bo and I used to talk about this all the time. Is like in college, like we would play a game where we would walk in the bus and I'd be like, or he'd be like, what are we arguing about today? Like that was like a game we would play with each other because we found so much amusement in playing, like you ever been in class and like you're doing a debate in class and the other team, like you don't get to pick your side. You just have to play devil's advocate. And so like we would do that for hours on the bus rides. We would play devil's advocate. And for me, the reason I think that that's the same thing is like some people could see that as like, oh, argumentative or like these things. And again, for sure, I'm sure I have pieces in me, like again, not perfect in that same way. Like for sure, I'm sure again, it all has blind spots. There's a time and a place. But my point is, again, along with it is it made me it built this skill in my head of a really deductive reasoner, right? And trying to see things from multiple viewpoints, right? And see things like from how this person's seeing it, how that person's seeing it, how that person's seeing it. And I was actually having this same thought process the other day is like a skill set that I had built is that actually when I started thinking about just different skill sets that I have. And like one thing is like, okay, we want to get here by 10 o'clock, right? And you're like this a lot. So I know you'll get this analogy a lot. When I say I want to get somewhere at 10 o'clock, I'm like, okay, this is going to take me 15 minutes. Then I'm going to have to drive here. That's another 10. Then I'm also going to be delayed with, X, Y, and Z. That's probably going to be another 15 here. That's going to be 30, blah, blah, blah. And I count it all up and I'm like, okay, I got to leave by this time. And I can all do that all within like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's a skill set that you developed. I've been around people that can't do that. They're always late.
Yeah, right.
They can never be on time because, again, they're always 30 minutes behind. They're always 45 minutes behind. They're always all these things where, again, I developed that skill set of being like I had to be to get places on time. And that was something that was important to me. And so, like, again, the same thought process as I think you go into that is you develop that skill set of seeing things from multiple different angles, which is one part of what you're saying as well, trying to see things from his angle and saying, I get it. You haven't seen these things, you have information I might have from 10 years ago, all these other things, blah, blah, blah. But I also flip it from the other side of that is the accountability standpoint that, again, along with that, I also am not going to reward, just keep rewarding people because you're being a dick. Right. And so what I mean by that is like, they've gotten used to with that when they respond aggressively or do whatever, that then they get a response. And again, kids do the same thing, right? If I act out my dog, if he barks, I open the door. Well, he's going to keep barking every time I open the door, right? Because that's what I'm training him to do. He knows that every time he barks, I open the door, right? So then you get that other side. And again, it also doesn't mean don't do anything. It doesn't mean don't open the door, but you might have to train something else. Like, hey, when you're quiet, when you sit at the door and you wait for 10 seconds, then I'll open the door, right? And I do that with my dog every day. It's a constant process. Is before we go outside, he's like ready to go, standing up, jumping out the door, and I'll sit there and I'll patiently wait. I won't say nothing to him, and then he'll look at me, and then he'll sit, and then we'll go outside the door, right? And so I think it's also in the same sense with audience members, the same thing too as well, is like, what are you training culture-wise of what you are responding to? Are you always responding to the aggressive guy that's always firing back at you? Or are you responding to the guys that are having discussion and they know how they're going to get a response out of you? Hey, if I respond aggressive, like he's not going to respond to me, or he's going to delete my comment, or he's going to, limit me, or there's so many options now with social media. You can, limit what the response is like, and you can do all of that. And I think that's also another thing too, is like you can train your audience in the same way of like what you're actually responding to. And I know some people, like for example, like Justin Stone, his technique as he's been building his audience was he never responded to those guys. Like any of those guys that or whatever, he never gave them a platform to his audience. And he's like, they could say whatever they want about me. Like, that's fine. Like, I'm going to keep posting and I'm going to stay, I'm not going to let them trick me out of my position, go down to their level or doing whatever. And he had a end goal in mind where he was going to go in professional baseball, and this is what he did. So he went about it that way because of, his goal that he had at the end. And also too, he's not finding identity in what, Rich that doesn't know, and he, knows two things in the human body from an anatomy standpoint is going to criticize him about the body,
Yeah. And I was going to say too, is like, I feel like I've built up almost like a wall in a sense of like, just me expressing my faith at such a young age. I feel like I've always ran into people that want to debate it, especially in college, that always want to challenge it and debate it. And most of the time, I just found that those people that would bring up those debates or those arguments with me, they didn't really want to listen. They just wanted to cause a problem. So, as a byproduct, over time, I've just not even shied away. I just know that typically they're not looking for an actual solution. They just want to cause problems. So, I've taken that approach, and like we've talked about it to social media, where like I would just not comment, because most of the time when people comment those things, it's like, okay, you're just gonna sit here and cause a problem, wreak havoc, whatever you're trying to do. And it's like, more than anything, it's like kind of a waste of my time, my energy. And so I just stopped arguing, all in all. But then also in a sense where you brought that perspective of like, yeah, but you also have this many thousand of followers on the account that, they may want perspective on all this too. It's like, and that's where too, I feel, and then too, now organic reach is so crazy. So it's like, you may have people that see 50 comments on something that don't follow you, and then they get on and see this conversation. And that could be one, a way of you, demonstrating your character and building, this relationship virtually with people, which could help grow your brand, your following, as well. But also to, convince them in a way that, okay, like, this is good information that is worth a follow. It's not just something that I'm going to pass on. And so, I think that's something too, is like, I know I personally struggle with, is like when to respond, when not to, because usually people don't want a solution or an answer when they come with a specific tone in their comment. And so normally I would just err on the side of not ever responding. But also too, it's like, there are people out there that do look at those things. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's trends on social media where people, like, their favorite thing to do is to get on TikTok and just look at comments. Like, they don't even look at the video. They just literally will look at comments.
I want to read the comments.
And so it's like, and then I know there's a lot of, me being younger, graduating college, a year and a half ago, and then knowing guys a year older, a year younger that are all graduating and, getting into this field and maybe going to facilities or starting their own personal brand, just locally giving lessons or whatever that, I know they deal with these struggles as well. They see it, it just the experience of, okay, I'm responding, but because of the 9,000 other people that follow this account that
Yeah.
you know, may want perspective, not because this one dude that responded, you know, a negative comment or a hateful comment, as well. And it's, you know, there is that importance of responding, but, and then also too, I think it's different. I think you listen to really anybody that's grown a brand, or their account. Any of them will say like how important consistency is, and quantity is, and responding to comments, and everything early on. But as they've grown bigger, like it's a stat that on all these accounts, there's once you hit a certain amount, you're a macro influencer and a mega influencer, and it's like engagement decreases tremendously once you hit a macro or mega influencer. And it's like, so at a certain point too, like one, you don't have to post 6 times a day, 5 times a day. As a mega influencer, you already have 3 million followers. They post, you know, all these TikTok kids, you know, they posted 5-6 times a day when they first started, but you know, they may have 1 million, 2 million followers. Like they may post twice a week, 3 times a week now. Like they've already built that following. And then also too, they don't respond to people as much anymore.
Yeah, cool.
You know, they may comment one time, you know, to drop in, you know, surprise, oh, blah, blah, blah commented. But then early on, they're answering every comment, in a sense too. Is like, that's helping build their following as well. And then too, algorithm wise, like they love comments. And so,
it's also different when you're like, also too, again, like what comments you're responding to, for example, like even to like some of these macro influencers, a lot of them are female, you know, again, statistically in the same sense, and especially like TikTok or like Reels or something like that, is definitely, it's an advantage there, definitely to be, especially if you're a pretty female, like, you know, a long times with that, it definitely helps, in that same way. But one of the big things I think is also it's still strategic of what you are responding to and what you're not. Also, a lot of people too, along with it, I know some people that, again, anytime they get a hateful or, you know, maybe it's, scandalous comment, especially if it's like a female or something like that, where they'll just delete it, you know, along with it and kind of manage it from there. I'm always strategic in what I'm responding to. Like, let's say someone's being a dick, but it's about a comment. His comment is something I know that a lot of people have interest in, or I've seen multiple times. Well, then I might respond to it. And again, it's not about him. I'm responding, again, like you're saying, so people will read through and like actually take some information from there. I know that at the end of all of it, that person's never probably going to agree, but a lot of people that hear my answers and go into those deeper things will, again, open their brain up to a lot of different ideas. So that's always specific also from that side. And also the other thing is like you had mentioned as well, is another thing is if they are an influencer themselves, right? So if they, and again, I wouldn't consider myself like, I guess technically, you know, an influencer or whatever. I don't identify with the title or whatever. But again, along with it, like if somebody else that has a bigger following, right? Again, there's a time and a place where like those, you know, for example, somebody else that already has credibility. And if they have credibility, it's like, again, like who am I responding to, right? Like, it's not that I always have to respond only to big accounts, but again, most likely, let's say, again, you have an account with 50,000 followers and you're seen as, you know, again, credible, and you have questions about X, Y, and Z, like, I probably will respond in that same way. Right. It's again that same area where there's a bigger demand on the business for me, obviously, to respond there. That's not always the case. Like, you know, again, I've had, you know, people comment that have followings and, you know, not say much. I mean, I remember, you know, Juan Soto, like he responded to like one of my things, and again, like I responded back to him, but again, like flipped it back as well. Like it's easy on the same way to have questions. And like try to poke holes in what I'm teaching. But again, like, okay, well then speak your truth.
Yeah, like what are you seeing? I believe it's like, you know, what are you seeing?
Well, I don't believe it's this. I believe it's this. Well, it's like, okay, well then now we can actually have a conversation because of your belief and my belief rather than us just attacking my belief. So I think that could be, you know, a major piece there as well. And I think on the other end of that, I want to circle back to this, but I also too want to go to like the audience side of like, okay, how should I ask my questions and like how should I do those things? And I think one of the big things is that it's great that you followed them. That's the first thing. If you really want answers and all those other things, the first step is I always look if somebody's actually following me, right? If you're not following me, that's step one. I also do think it's interesting though when someone attacks me and they're also following me. I'm like, okay, well, you're following my comments. You're following my all my. Obviously, you like my or you did at one time.
Yeah, but at least it shows that they're like trying to look at your stuff.
Engage, right? So that's my first thing is like, are you following me? You're not following me. First thing I usually look at. Two, on the opposite side of that as well. Again, the other thing is like obviously how you ask the question. Okay, that's another one. Also, you know, obviously what the question is actually about. Again, are you and that you don't necessarily have so much control over that as an audience member, but just understand that, like, again, I can't talk about everything all the time. So again, and also too, maybe I don't have material. I don't have time to answer that question. Like maybe it's a more lengthier thing, something to get into. The other thing is, again, obviously with that is like, again, it's just like being in person, like be a respectful human being, understand your tone of what it sounds like. And again, there's actually literally, even on my computer, I have this on all of my emails. There's a thing that checks my tone in my message and shows me with an emoji, right? How I'm coming off. Am I coming off professional?
Yeah.
Am I coming off like funny? Am I coming off there? And is actually, again, they have an algorithm that like, it gives me an emoji at the bottom. Like this sounds, again, it shows me a business suit. If a guy is like, if it sounds very professional. And so some of those things I think is interesting. And again, for me being in different places of knowing how my tone comes off in writing. So that's another thing as well. And the biggest thing though, is again, a lot of times when people get responses out of me is, when they literally will state like, they'll say something like, hey, I'm not like attacking, or I'm not doing these types of things. Like I'm genuinely curious. Like, or again, they say something like, hey, like, can you help me understand how this, and this, or can you, and another thing, also to my other favorite that they slide underneath there is when they're like, or can you point me to a resource, right? Because that's like a respect for my time. Or can you point me to a resource where you've talked about this in the past, or somewhere I can read more on it, right? Because that's more than likely where I can, again, that's also helpful for other people, right? Because if I only answer you, right, and I got a million people and also hundreds of comments and all those things as well, like, and I'm only direct messaging you, is like the answer to everybody is like, obviously much bigger. But I think that's the other thing as well, is like more often than not, again, the questions you're asking are not unicorn questions. They're generally things that a lot of people would like to know.
Yeah.
And maybe there's, again, a frequently asked question thing that I've actually posted before and something I've talked about where I could point you to something that I can go with. And then the other thing as well is like, the other place as well is like, again, a lot of people that almost always get a response from me have invested in our business, right? They have Farm Plus, they have Farm Boards, they have insoles, they have, maybe they've trained with us before, all those other things. Like, especially too, anybody that I've ever trained with before, I mean, that's like, you're like 100% like response rate. Like I'm gonna respond to you in that same way. It's like, you're one of our guys, like you're in our family, and the same thing too. Like I'm going to prioritize, like you on top of that as well. And again, that there's levels obviously too. We're starting to get so many people that I've now trained that it's like, even some of those guys have to wait a little bit for me to get back to them. But it just depends, like, what's going on and all those other things. But I do think obviously it's an important piece of like how you're asking is really important, especially when you're asking something from someone for free. Like, and that's a entitled thing that I have to get away from. And me and Bobby talked about that in the other podcast, as being like this entitlement thing of like you're entitled to a response. You're entitled to this influencer. He has to answer my questions. And if he doesn't, he's an asshole. Like, no, like you're getting it for free. Even when I respond to Gary Vee, I don't get mad when he doesn't respond. Like, or again, the same thing too, even a mid-level account. Like, at times like I'll tag, like maybe it's Casey Smith or, even Tewksbury. Like, dude, sometimes I send questions to Tewksbury. Like, I have his cell phone number and he doesn't respond to me sometimes. And the same thing back to him. Like, I might be busy. I just didn't, I missed it. And we'll talk about it next time I see Joe. Like, whatever. Like, instead of having this place of like, you're entitled to an answer, like, bro, again, you could flip it each way and say, oh, like, ego one way or another, but like, isn't it kind of egotistical that you think that like you're owed it?
Always, yeah.
Like when it's a free resource, when in reality, like maybe you should just go read a textbook.
Yeah.
Like if you're not so sure, like I'm helping you, right? And again, the person you're asking the question to, the reason you're asking is because they're helping you. So I think on that other side of that is like, I just don't feel an obligation, really to do anything. And I think that, again, along with that is like, I'm not obligated to respond now. If I choose to respond, then I do, and that's something where, again, I think it's freedom from like, from posting. It's like, I don't ever feel like I have to do anything, rather than saying like, hey, like, I think, and that's the other thing, if you're not passionate about it, I don't think that it's sustainable. It's gonna be very hard to respond to people and have conversations and all these other things. Like, it's really hard to talk about something you're not passionate about.
Right.
So I also too just happen to be passionate about these certain things, and also too, like if I don't feel like talking about it, well then I'm not gonna respond to you. Like it's like
Yeah.
I don't. And again, if you're gonna get mad, then you're gonna get mad. Like whatever. Like it
Yeah.
just is what it is. Like,
Yeah, no, that's something that you said earlier to kind of tie it back. The about posting something that brings value. Like most of the time, too, we're not posting stuff if we don't feel like it helped. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like even if it's slightly outlandish, like we're not posting someone doing something,
to get likes.
thinking,
Yeah.
thinking that this is gonna make people worse.
Yeah.
Right.
If it is to get likes, it's. I think this is really valuable.
Yes.
And it will probably end up getting a lot of engagement because of how valuable it is. But it's not because we're not posting strictly like, hey, let's put this hanging from the ceiling and do this because it
Yeah.
will get a whole bunch of likes.
It's not
like,
entertainment.
That's not. Yeah.
It's
we're
not entertainment. It's
Yeah, for sure.
you know, it's because we've seen growth and progression and
Yeah.
value to this particular drill or how this was communicated to a hitter. And you know, when it's funny, see, this is probably the second most common thing I see is like these guys are out to get your money. Don't ever listen to these guys, right? It's like they're just trying to get your money.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I kind of just like through conversation thought about this. It's like our whole life we're sitting here and told by parents, teachers, people, you know, older than us, that, you know, elders, you know, you grow up to do whatever you want, grow up and do like, you know, follow what you're passionate about. You can make a living doing anything, all these different things that we're getting told, like dream big. You know, if you're passionate about it, you can, you know, make a living doing it, do what you love, etc. And it's like, well, then you get on social media. It's like, you can actually make money doing what you love now if you're willing to put yourself out there in like multiple platforms and be vulnerable in that sense. And it's like, well, then people turn around and then say the opposite. Oh, they're just trying to get your money. It's like, well, also like one, I'm not just trying to get your money, but also two, like I'm trying to make a living. I'm trying to make a living doing what I love to do. It's like, you know.
Well, it's just like the other thing is I again, when people say that, like I have no like doesn't like super bother me as well, like in the same sense of being like sometimes when like the main one, like a lot of times I will respond to because it's more of like a trigger for me is like when someone says like a kid's gonna get hurt or something.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of times I'll respond to some of those just because it's always said by like, you know, some guy that is never even took a health class. And like, you know, sometimes again, like along with that, and again, even then, like there's particular ones that I'll respond to. And like,
Yeah.
I can tell you, every time I post a farm board video, it's like, oh, he's going to pour his groin. I'm like, again, for the, you know, thousandth,
Billionth
you know,
time, yeah.
multi-thousands boards that we've sent out and all those other things. Like, and again, in-house with all that stuff, like I've never had an injury to anybody's groin or any of your other stuff. Like, again, along with it. And if you have it, your thing is probably has to do with your instruction more than it does a tool. Like you can also get hurt using a squat rack. Like
Right.
how you use the squat rack is important.
Yeah.
So like all of those things, and again, along with it, I think is that there, but also on the other end of that is again, there's this growth on the other side of that it really comes from, and it's not, and I don't want to keep posting it like, oh, you just shouldn't, like, I just don't feel this way, you shouldn't care. But I do think from a perspective from this other thing, it's just like, it should bring awareness to you that like why do you care so much? And not in a sense of like that should be the end of the conversation. It's a real question. Like, why do you care so much?
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's a hard question I've had to ask myself. Like, why do you care so much? Are you, again, and one of the things one of the biggest pieces of advice, and there's one nugget that I could give to somebody that's posting. And this is actually something that my girlfriend gave to me when we were talking about posting, and I was struggling with comments, you know, a couple months back, where it was like, okay, hey, what does this look like? And again, this is to share with you guys as well, like the growth that I've gone through in this area. It's not to say that I'm, again, never dealt with problems with this, check, right, moved on. But it's, again, along with it, as she said, like, she's like, well, I'm posting because if one person that helps them, well, then I did my mission. Like, then it's good. Rather than, again, 99 out of 100 be like, oh, this isn't useful, whatever. But that one person was like, man, this is life-changing. It's like, well, then great. Like, that's why I was posting in the first place. It's for the one, not for the 99.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're posting for the one and not the 99, and again, if one person like values, again, we get one like, great. If someone watched it entirely through and like, okay, added a little something, like, great, awesome. And I think it's just like another twist on the same thing too, as well. It's like, because it is free, right? Like, I don't feel an obligation there. It's just being like, Now I'm putting you on free game, bro.
Right.
Take the meat, leave the bones. You don't like it, move on. If you like
Yeah.
it, great, awesome. If you don't like, again, the same thing too. I'm gonna keep posting every single day. Come back tomorrow, then. Come back tomorrow, then. Maybe I'll answer it tomorrow. Maybe the next day. Maybe the other day. Like, great. You know, like I don't know if you guys know this. At one point, I think it was like 20 days straight. I added and sent things to Gary Vee every day, asking him to be on the podcast. Every single day. Posted. He never responded one time. Oh, I'm also still a massive Gary Vee fan. We're okay, right? It's great, like awesome, right? Like along with it, I don't feel like he owes me a response. Like
Right.
if he happens to respond, and and again, I was trying to get him on the podcast, but it's like the same thing too. It's like I don't care on the same way. It's like it'd be awesome. It's an opportunity. It's like I'm not entitled to him coming on because I asked. Like people pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get this guy to come talk to them or whatever. If he wants to spend 5 minutes on a podcast, like awesome,
Right.
all great, so I think it's just big from that side, and I think it's just like, again, a bigger question, again, to go back to that root issue is like, why do you care so much? And unpack that for yourself, because it's different for everybody. Maybe your dad, didn't do this when you were a kid. Maybe it was your mom. Maybe, again, like you had some separation there. Maybe, again, like maybe you need to talk about it with your therapist, maybe. And again, I don't say that like as like a knock, like, bro, maybe you do.
Yeah.
Like it's fine. Like, again, the same thing. I have plenty of therapists in my life, let alone, actual therapists, right? So like, it's not about those other things. Talk about it with your friends. Let it be a conversation piece. Let it talk to other people. Just like, again, that massive guy with a following reached out to me and asked me like, hey, how do you handle this? Even though I got a smaller thing from that. But again, he doesn't post a lot of controversial stuff. I do.
Right.
So he came to me for advice specifically because he knows that I post controversial stuff all the time and how to deal with it. Right. And I think you have, identity in the same sense of like, your credibility coming from what people think about you. Well, then, yeah, you're going to be on a roller coaster ride your whole life, and I think that's a bigger thing, is like when you're actually locked in and you have real confidence on the other side of like true, authentic confidence, where it's like, again, it's not confidence check, right? It's a daily habit of weeding yourself
Right.
of things that are happening throughout your life, what people have said, blah, blah, blah. Because again, someone can have and again, I could probably connect with you here just thinking like this. There is a time in your life where you had less, right? You knew less, you did less, you had less success, you had all these other things, and you had more confidence. So confidence isn't strictly by doing and what you know and all these other things. Typically, it actually happens the opposite way. The more you do, right, the more people you've worked with, the more you learn, the more all those other things. A lot of times confidence goes back the opposite way, and we've talked about it with the competence and confidence curve.
Yeah.
Competence and confidence curve is typically in the very beginning. You're way more confident when you first start doing a task than you are as you go throughout time and realize how much you don't know. But again, along with that is like, again, that they're not directly tied together, right? And along with it is like, I'm not confident in everything I'm saying is right. I'm just confident that I'm sharing with what I believe to be true right now and where my mind's currently at. And it's also rooted from the research and the things that I've done. And I'm also open, right? Where I think the confidence in the other way is like, my identity isn't in my information, right? I find more in the same thing too, as well as like, like I'm going to think with you. We're going to talk. We're going to have good conversation, all those other things. Like me as a person is not going to come from me being right is not what gives me confidence, right? I'm confident that I'm more confident that I'm wrong, right? And that if you have a conversation with me, like I'll change my mind.
Right.
Like that again, if like you rooted from the other side, it's like there's enough evidence on the way. Like, okay, I'll think again about it.
Yeah.
We can change my mind and progress the conversation.
Yeah. And I think the big thing too is there's some challenges with all this stuff, but I've just reflecting myself, I think the most growth I've ever had with relationships with people that we do challenge each other's way of thoughts. And to not in a way that like, we're sitting here, going at each other's throats, but I'm just sitting here personally, like the friend that moved in recently, like he's in PT school, and he made a comment, something about catchers getting hurt, and was like, well, if they just stretched before. And I was like, do they really need to stretch before? Is that something that's like, is that the lowest hanging fruit? Is that the first thing that they should do? I was just like, because personally, it's like, I feel like a lot of them have more range of motion in their pelvic region than most people do. I was like, just personally speaking. And, it's like, and talked about it for like an hour of like all of his, reasonings behind it, all my reasonings behind it. And then, we get to the end, it's like, the end of our conversation, not, the end of it all. But, it's like me and him probably more than anyone probably argue, but also too, it's like, if you were to ask me who one of my best friends are, I'm going to say him 10 times out of 10, and vice versa. Like he even made the comment, he was just like, you're good company. This is like, I always like having these conversations. Like I always like find myself growing, like when we challenge each other a little bit. And it's like, and so like with that too, is like, I don't ever encourage people not to comment too, but how you go about that is super important when it comes to, commenting to us or someone else, let's say, and then the expectation behind it. And so, I just didn't want to give off the persona that I don't encourage comments. It's just, it is something that people struggle with. And then like the tone, like you said, how they use, or what kind of tone they use in the comment, but also too, like the comments also lead to some really good conversations at times. Personal growth for both of us, and to if they're happening on social media, the people around us, and kind of like, get refined and like,
well, and if we didn't want, if again, it's also just so everybody else knows, I don't know if you're not a creator, maybe you don't know, but also too, if I didn't want any comments, I was turning the comments off.
Right.
Like,
which people do.
It's really,
people do.
Yeah, 100%. People do it all the time. They just can't handle the comments. Like, turn the comments off. Like, great. Like, on the other opposite side of that, it's like, I also think on the same side is like, that shouldn't be the end of the conversation. Yeah. You probably, again, if you can't handle the comments, probably awareness of some, things that are going on, and like again, like things that are bothering you and why. But I do think like on the same sense of like, again, that other piece of, and I should have prefaced this too, and maybe you can grab this and throw it at the beginning or something. But I should have prefaced this too, is that like when we're talking about social media comments, this isn't about social media comments. Like this is, again, just like when like Michael Todd's talking about that, where he's talking about being cuffed to the comments. Cuffed to the comments is also too what your friends think about you, what other coaches think about. Like, this take social media, act like it doesn't exist. Yeah. If you're still finding those things, and you're not going to be, as a coach, you're not going to do things because you're worried about what other people think about you and what they think about how you run your practice and how they think about you hitting, how you think about, again, and we talk about this as well, how many players that we have that do drills that really help them, but then they get in a clubhouse and they have a problem having a conversation about what really helps them, and they won't do what really helps them because they're worried about what Johnny in the corner might think, or the coach, or the X, Y, and Z, and what that is. And there's some truth in there of figuring out how to like interact in a clubhouse and like what you need to do. But it's also really important that just in life, that's something that you need to bring awareness. Like, it's not social media's problem. It's a problem with our social interactions, and it's being exposed by social media. Right. And so it's like, again, if you're being exposed on social media because you weigh and you care about what other people think too much, well, great. That's great time for personal growth for you, is figuring out why you do care so much. And that's in life, not just in the podcast, right? I mean, or podcast, or in a social media post, in a whatever that is for you. If it's out at a dinner, if it's out at your mother-in-law's questioning how you're raising your son, right? Whatever that is, right? And having identity in those other things and what these people think, rather than just being like, hey, from where I sit, it's blah blah blah. Let's, I'm like, again, and also too, who are you letting speak into your life, right? Right? Who are you letting? Who that is? Again, is it? And that's where something I even had to address myself. And sometimes, again, I still check myself too. Is like, who am I talking to? Right? Am I, again, for example, like when you're talking to your buddy about like, a PT, like again, nothing hit on that. Like, I know you have your strengths as a PT. There's gonna be things that you know that I don't know, like for sure. Individual muscles, you probably know where some small muscle is that I have no idea what the hell it is and what it's called, and for sure where it's located and what striations it has and whatever you learned in your class last week. Like, I get it. Some things, you're gonna know the thing. That's not where my confidence can come from when I talk to you. Yes, a lot of it also too comes from like experience and a lot of those things as well. But some of the deeper rooted things you're going to pull from is, again, along with it, is that why are you having so many ties to what you know? And again, that's idolatry. Like, you're idolizing your information, right? Which is like one of the main things we did from the beginning of time. We wanted to know more, right? And we're finding identity in knowing more. When in reality, if you have an identity in knowing more, you're going to lose on that same side of being like, hey, like, I'm just learning, right? And along with it, like, Just because I know more doesn't mean I'm worth more,
Right.
right?
Right.
And also, first off, I know a lot of people that know a lot of things that are broke.
I was gonna say there's a lot of
Right.
people that have huge followings on social media
Yeah.
that double down on one textbook that they read.
For sure.
You know.
Yeah, and that's all they do. And again, along with it, just because you have a big following doesn't mean you know a lot. Just because you have a small following doesn't mean you don't know.
No,
You know how many big leaguers / hitting coaches / big names in all of baseball, all those other things like have the smallest accounts.
Right.
Like for example, like I'm gonna get a plug. Watch, he's gonna get a whole bunch of followers now. So like for example, like Vinsoyak with the Dodgers, right? He literally has an account, like a burner account. It has no picture, like 200 followers, never post, and he DMs me from that account
Yeah.
all the time, right? So if that's the case on the same side, like he's not posting, he's not a good follow because he's not posting anything. He literally just consumes. He goes on social media to consume. That's why nobody follows him, right? Now, along with that though, is again like you think his identity is coming in from the same thing too. It's like, okay, well, everybody doesn't know how much I know. Like, get over it. Okay, like it doesn't matter. So I think in the real root is like, again, self-awareness of understanding where that is. Again, if your heart is more focused on how, I think this is where you get mixed up. And again, probably the biggest nugget you can take of like go-dos, I think you can go from here, is identifying of just like, if you're more focused on what people think about you rather than helping people, you already messed up. You already flipped. It became about me instead of about them. As soon as that flip-flop happened, and it became about what they think of me rather than who am I helping and why am I posting in the first place? Well, I've already shifted my whole thing, right? It's not about on the same thing too. It's like everybody needs to think I don't care. Like you could think I'm an idiot. Like that's fine. I'm still helping people. Like again, I'm still in the same thing. And also too, like even if I'm not finding, okay, well, what if you're finding identity in like helping people? Like, well, first off, I mean, the same thing too, like being a servant, like again, along with it is like rooted back more, me from like from God from that same way, just being like, just serving others. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not doing it because I want them to acknowledge how much I'm serving them. It's just like, again, it fills my cup to help people.
Yeah.
Right. And to give them information and to share my journey. Now, again, along with it, if you find it valuable or you don't, like, that's fine. I'm not posting it so that you can tell me how cool my journey is. Right.
Yeah.
Like, just having conversations, and if you pull meats from it and whatever, just like I did from people the whole time when I was growing up, I was literally flip-flop this. And one of the things that's made me want to do a lot more podcasts lately is I had a realization actually from watching Michael Todd was doing a podcast, and I was like, man, like how cool. I only see him in like sermons. And then I thought about it and I'm like, a lot of people only see me when I'm doing sermons, right? And my sermons are me out there coaching a player, and they see that side of me where like, but they don't get to have a personal, like, again, hear my thought process, how I go by the why, all these other things. And I'm like, wait, like, well, I could have just continue doing podcasts like I've done for so long, right? And so I think that that's another thing, for me, in that way that I've kind of opened from that same side of just being like, hey, like let's have longer form content. Longer form content is very important, especially from your initial engagement. Great, your reel grabs them. Okay, but where can you send them to actually consume and like learn a bunch of things? And these longer form content is a big piece for them to actually connect and get to understand more mindset stuff and breakthrough. Because again, a lot of times your question that you think is this is another root, a nugget for you, is every problem is going to lead to the next problem. So as soon as you figure out this problem, well, then there's going to be another one. And then as soon as you figure out there's going to be another one, right? And there'll be bigger and problem and all these things, right? So everything leads to a next. So you ask a question, I give you an answer. Well, guess what? It's going to lead to another question. Right. It's going to lead to another question. Well, then how did this? How did this? How did this? How did this? The reason I know that is that's exactly how I've learned. I answered one question. Then it led me to another question. It led me to another question. And John Maxwell actually has a whole book on that great leaders ask great questions. And the reason of that is a question is a key to a door that you didn't even know what was behind the door. And then you open the door and then you find a whole bunch of things because you asked the right question, right? So when you ask questions, it's going to lead to more things. So along with that, like there's been resources where you can dig deeper and deeper. And obviously on the same thing too, is like, I'm not supposed to be your everything. Like I might lead you to some directions, point you in some right places. But like, again, if you can know everything I know in the next 2 sentences, like 1, I'm not that good of a communicator. 2, no one is. 3, on the top of that as well, is that again, I can't answer everything. I can't answer everything that you want to know. And I'm just going to put this out there, like, again, along with it is like, the Bible's pretty long. Okay. I haven't read every book in there. I haven't read every single line. And if I did, I probably forgot half of it.
Right.
Okay. So again, along with it, it's like going back in and consuming a lot of these things is like that. Again, there's so much information out there. There's so many things to know. There's so many other things. Like we're always missing something. Right. And if it's on one subject or another, again, like, like my brothers take me in to do like marble and granite or something like that. Like there's so much about it I have no idea about, right? But also too, they don't know so much stuff about baseball, right? There's so many things. Like my brother actually called me. This will be another good podcast. This actually, I thought about this. Is he called me because he didn't understand why typically you wouldn't throw your best pitcher. So think of like a starter, your best pitcher to close, and why that doesn't happen very often, right? And why? Because it happened with like the Mariners the other day.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how the Mariners fan, like when he put the pitcher in, he was like, "Oh, we're gonna lose. Like that's it. Like blah 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 blah." And then he's like, "I don't understand. Like he can't perform under pressure. He can't do that." And I'm like trying to explain the intricacies of like what a closer is and why that role is so different. And even though they are a pitcher and they have a skill set that goes across the board, that it is a different position. And even though that they have, like, for example, I explained it to him like it's like a slot receiver compared to like a wide receiver, right? Do they have some of the similar characteristics? Like, yes. Do they have to sprint, cut, make a catch, do X, Y? Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a different position.
Right.
And you're being asked to do different things. And also, too, for example, I think one of the bigger things, again, I know we're going down a whole nother rabbit hole, but again, was me explaining the intricacies as well of being like, hey, like early in the game, hitters are more selective. Late in the game, they're more aggressive.
Right.
So late in the game, closers are also really good at making strikes look like balls. Sorry, balls look like strikes, right? So they are swinging because they think it's a strike, but it ends up being a ball. And pitchers that are really good at doing that are a lot more successful, where starters are, again, much more pound the zone, all those things, even though they have good stuff. They're very good at making balls look like strikes. And so, I'm sorry, strikes look like balls, opposite way, that way, right? Is that they'll throw a ball outside the zone, the hitter will shut it down, and then boom, it breaks and hits a corner, right? Like boom, okay, now they start getting ahead in the counts and they start working it that way. So it's a lot of those things of like, that mixture of like what that looks like, and there's so much intricacies into all of that. But my point is again, like this is also one of the leading guys in the world that knows how to install marble and granite. But again, in this area, he's an expert, and another he's not.
Yeah.
And that's completely okay. And we're just talking baseball. And he reached out to me. Why? Because he goes, I figured you might know a little bit about this subject. Yeah, probably. Let's talk about, And again, if I had a marble and granite question, I'd reach out to him because I had,
Yeah.
like, that's okay.
Yeah, no, and just to kind of point on that too, it's just like came up. It's like to pitch in a different situation or be a starter versus a closer to a reliever. It's like essentially it's a completely different role.
100%.
It's like think about how valuable in every sport. Like we're watching the Chiefs Bills, and they brought up like the number 2 receiver for the Bills, how valuable he is because he can be the 1, the 2, and the slot and the tight end. And they were like, while there's similarities to it, he can literally play every position. And they referred to him as like arguably the smartest wide receiver in the NFL. And they were like, this is why the Bills receiving staff is so lethal currently. It's like he has the ability to line up anywhere. Or like think about LeBron. Why is LeBron one of the best to ever play the game? He could be a point guard or he could be a center. Like anybody, like, yes, there's some greats that, specialize at a position, right? But it's like, why is Ohtani so freakish and like we're all like freak out? He can pitch and then he goes and he hits, like,
and he's lead at both.
Yeah. It's like, if you can go and play multiple roles, it's like, think about how valuable you are then too. It's like, it's not easy, like for a starter to come in and close.
No. And there's certain ones, like for example, I gave him the example of like, like Scherzer or something. Like Scherzer is like a psychopath.
That boy's a dog.
Great. Like he's a dog. Like throw him on the mound. And he has came in the close again, like in the last
sure.
like playoffs, I think it was, where he came in and he's done that stuff, right? Especially you need multiple innings or whatever that looks like. And again, it might be a certain scenario. But like, again, along with it, it's like a lineman, like there's literally same thing as a pitcher. They don't just say pitcher. It's you have starting pitcher, relieving pitchers, right? Specialists no longer exist, but there was those as well. And then also too, on top of that as well, you also have your setups, and you also have a closer. And there's certain roles and certain guys that go in certain reasons because their stuff, they're really good at that type of role. And also too, for example, like also with certain mentalities, like closers, like when I used to spot start and close, I had to bring a different mentality to each, right? Because if I pitched like I closed to start the game, one, I'm going to be tired by the third inning, right? And then also on top of that as well, like I'm throwing, like early in the game, you're like, going a lot more at hitters compared to late in the game. Again, the same thing. I'm trying to make a lot more swing and miss. Like I need a lot more swing and miss stuff. So I throw my pitches different. And again, I would throw my curveball as hard as I could.
Yeah,
Every single time I'd throw it because again, same thing. I was trying to make it look like my fastball. And on top of that as well, I wanted it to look like a strike and then break out of the zone. And I would increase my spin rate when I did that. Right. And so like, again, with all of those things, again, not to get off our original topic, is just like the point of all of that is just being like, listen, like there's a lot to learn in a lot of areas. And at the end of the day, I would challenge you in the same way as like, go back and look at your real intentions of why maybe they got twisted at one point, because it happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Right. You had started with good intentions and then slowly your mindset started shifting into, you started getting a bigger following, and we call it getting like bamboozled by the blessing, right? Like Michael Todd thing, right? Getting bamboozled by the blessing, where you end up building this big following and then all of a sudden you start really caring what they think. Right. When in reality, like, well, why was I posting in the first place? And also, again, along with it, I think there's obviously a lot of mental health that gets attached in there. And maybe I can swing into a Taylor podcast here soon about a lot of that stuff and the things there. But I think the big thing as a poster is getting back to your root of being like, well, why am I posting? And if it was built on intentions or a shaky foundation, of course you're only going to be able to build to a certain size, because again, you can't get past that. And again, foundationally, there's something broken in there that we have to fix, and that maybe needs some healing or is crying out there for that. We can dive into that, those other things. But it's like, again, as soon as you start getting focused, just like on a team, when you start going into a slump, it becomes about you and less about your team, right? Get focused on how you can serve others, how you can love others, how you can serve the team, how you can do these other things. And I think of the same thing too, mental health wise for you guys today as well, is the main thing that happens as well is that like I say it's like the devil's ploy is getting you focused back on you and everywhere you're falling short and all the things you can't do and blah, 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 and all these other things. When in reality, it's like you're spending all that time on this rather than it should be spent on how can I help, look at the people around you and where can I serve today? How can I help these individuals get to where they want to go and what their dreams are? What am I missing? There's so many conversations. There's so many things happening in your life. There's so many things happening in everybody's lives. And figuring out and getting out of me and getting into others and figuring out where that is there as well and how much healing that brings back to you.
Right.
Is big on that same way, because again, a lot of things that you're dealing with and you're struggling with and you're bringing awareness to, they're not going to be fixed by like I talked about this. I was talking about this yesterday. Was everywhere you fall short, like when you focus on everywhere you fall short, it's immobilizing. Like it literally is like stagnant water, right? It's like, I don't want to do anything now. I'm not motivated. I just want to stay home. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to it just starts, it starts built, all those other things. I don't want to post. I have millions of subscribers. I won't post for a month, like immobilizing, right? And then you seclude into your own, by yourself, right? You isolate, all those things start to happen. When in reality, the same thing too, as well as being like, okay, hey, like, when I get out of that other place and like, again, I go to these other things of looking about as well everywhere else where, again, who I can love on, all those other things is like, the main example that I think about this is, I went and visited a Power 5 school last year. And during that time, it was and a coach, I know you guys can identify with this. There was a funk like in the team, like they had lost some games they were supposed to win. Everybody was kind of like, it got rainy, like it got humid, it was hot outside, all these things started happening. And then, all these compounding things. And then also too, they lost a tough one the day before. And there was just this energy that's like flowing around within the team, right? And everybody knows what that's like, right? To be on a team where it's just like, man, it just doesn't feel that, right? But it also all starts where even when I was there, like, it's not my team, but I started thinking about the same thing too, just being like, I remember when I was a regional at one point and I went into this facility and the culture was like that. Nobody wanted to be there. Right. Like I actually sat down with one of our main employees at one point. He sat down with me because he was late to work and then rolled in with a Starbucks. So we had a good conversation, but we sat down and I said, hey, like, you know, and he's like, well, you know, Joey, like, I don't wake up every day wanting to come to work like you do, you know, all excited, ready to rock. And I said, well, first off, you got that twisted, right? It's not that I wake up every day with a whole bunch of energy and all these other things. Like, it's also on the same thing as well as like, this is a choice, right? That I'm making a choice. I literally sit out in the parking lot and I'm sitting in my car and I just drove an hour to get here all the way across town. And again, I just worked a triple yesterday and you would have no idea is me sitting in the car going, you know what? This energy, this building is filled with bad energy and a whole bunch of things. If I want to change the vibe and I want to change the culture and all those other things, I am making a choice to be that energy. I'm making a choice to be that positive energy. I'm choosing to have energy. I'm choosing to come in and change the environment. And again, I'm not going to be the thermostat here, you know? And again, along with that is like, I'm choosing to change, right? What the thermostat reads, right? And again, along with that is like me coming in with all that energy and me changing what that looks like is a choice on my part. And I can always choose to do the opposite. I just choose not to, right? And so, you know, again, within that, going back to that team example, I remember is the same thing as that the coach I could also feel was also starting to internalize where the environment was really starting to affect their mental health, right? And how they were feeling and how happy they were and all these other things. And again, very easily we can get tricked into having identity into how my team's feeling and how everybody has a whole bunch of energy and all these other things. And I think, again, that flip-flop was like, even in that moment, I chose in the same way. It's like, well, then I'm going to be the one with a whole bunch of energy, right? And I immediately, subconsciously, and I thought about it later on, is I immediately responded back with like, I was the one with a whole bunch of energy and playing around and like, you know, like started again along with it because that's my natural, my ability. It's like, you know, and the same thing too is like when I recognize those other things, and I think it's like the leadership that's like built inside of me, it's like, I'm going to change the environment.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to sit in this anymore, you know, and that's how I'm going to change it is by loving others and hyping them up and dang, Cody, them new shoes, bro. Like, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's like changing that up.
Yeah, no, same thing with coaching too. You run into it all the time. Like a kid comes in and, you know, struggles of all sorts of angles that they could have anymore, you know. They come in and you have that choice, right? You could sit there and you know, we have groups of 3 and maybe 2 of them struggled, had bad days or whatever, showed up to school late, got a ticket and they're 16 and now their parents mad at them.
Yeah, mom called them as soon as they got out of school.
Yeah, you know, something like that. And you know, who even knows and all this stuff. It's like kid gets their phone taken away, comes in a bad attitude. It's like, you know, they're going to sit here and they're going to have these responses, but, you know, doubling down on that and just being negative back to them. It's like, never have I ever seen a positive session from someone being like, okay, you're going to be negative. I'll be negative too. It's like, I'll sit here, you know, sometimes there is like a statement piece in there. Yeah. You know, but like you're saying, like you can be that choice to change the energy and not as often as I would like does the energy always change, but you know, it is that seed that does need to be planted and, you know, leading by example in a sense. So,
well, and again, leadership is leadership across the board. If it's coaching, parenting, you know, business, whatever it is, right? Like I think along with that, and it's something to come back into is like, I get that. And that's where I know, like, you know, Gary Vee and like in the same way what he's talking about that, like in comments, right? But like, okay, I want him to come back with the positive sides with that. But I also think on the same side as with that is like I've also heard him. He's practical in the same sense of like everything isn't sunshine and rainbows. Everything isn't always going well all the time. Everything isn't all. You know, there is the practical side of having real conversations and what that is. And I'm not saying the opposite. It's just also within that, like I'm gonna keep posting. I'm gonna keep having energy. I get to choose, right? Either I can choose like along with it, like sure, I can do all these things and I can get less criticism, but I'm sacrificing something else to it. There's a trade-off, right? So one of the things that really gets me going and fills my cup and all these other things is posting, sharing, you know, helping others, all these other things. But now I'm not going to do that because Johnny 5'6", with no picture said I'm an idiot. Right? And again, it's really taking those other pieces and going, so my choice then therefore is to not post because of this. So then I'm also going to get criticized because I'm not posting because I haven't done these other things. Like there's nothing you're going to do that's going to avoid criticism. So you might as well get criticized and do what you love and also get fulfillment and also realize that again, like, this isn't heaven. This isn't the most magical place that everything would be sunshine and rainbows. Like I get to choose and be an influence in the environment is again the same thing too. And I'm not gonna be 100% every single day. I'm not gonna be perfect every single day. At the end of the day, that I'm gonna show up. Like you just need to show up. And again, when you show up, and again along with that, and your authentic self, and also what I really mean is the same thing too with that is like when you choose your energy and you choose how I feel about it, it's like, yeah, like I could sit around all day and complain about things and about how this is not happening, these other things. But at the end of the day, everybody could do that, right? Like I have to make that decision like, hey, like I'm going to show up, I'm changing this environment. And also too, I get to pick my attitude, right? Like I get to pick the attitude I have about this. Like, again, if homeboy out there could be laying bricks on 110 degrees every single day and doing and he could have a really good attitude, and let alone, I know, like I actually used to call this in that exact moment, going back to that regional moment is, I might've told you the story before, but I used to have this one GM and I used to love it. Cause I used to, I should interview him one time cause it's such a ball of energy. But, I used to have him come in and he worked for the Army at one point, and, or maybe it was the Air Force, I forget. But in any case, one of his jobs was he literally, not figuratively, literally had to light poop on fire and stir it until it all burnt off. And was his job. Would stand there in the suit outside sweating, like that was his job. And what he got hired to do, and it was like not hired to do. He had other jobs, but it's like they said, hey, you have this duty. You need to go do these things. And so like he would give that perspective, and the same thing too. It's like, hey, if I can find a way to channel like in that moment of like what he needed to do in his head to make that happen, where again, he could still be who he was today. And then again, if you knew him, he'd be like, again, he's like really high level leader, like whole bunch of energy all the time, all these other things. And so like, we used to talk about that all the time. It's just like, hey, like it's not that bad, right? Like perspective wise, like you're getting some criticism on social media. Someone hurt your feelings. Like, again, you can choose how you deal with that, right? And again, you can let it label you, right? Hurt your heart, let it into your heart, let it grow a tree, let it do all those other things. You can go in there with a, chainsaw, rip that bad boy out today and let's get back to work. You know what I'm saying? Let's get it back going. Let's get, again, stop laying those roots in there. Go in there and cut down the weeds and everything you let grow inside your thing, and let's get back to work, and again, along with that, it's not easy. I'm not painting this thing that it's, all of a sudden I just made a choice today that, I'm going to make one decision and everything's going to be beautiful from this point forward. No. I'm going to have to make this decision over and over and over and over and over and over. And again, the same thing too. It's just like I had the conversation with Taylor, but also too, with my girlfriend the other day, we started talking about that with posting and having influence inside the place and social media or anywhere out in the world, and talking about what is at the end of the day, like you have to post, right? If that's what you want to do, it's like coaching. I want to be a coach, but I'm not coaching. Bro, find somewhere to coach. Find, if it's the Little League down the street, if it's again, I was an assistant at a high school. That's where I started again, was paying to coach, was waking up at 4 a.m, doing that. Like find somewhere to coach. You can't coach without coaching. Go coach. Build your experience. Find a place. Get your foot in the door. Get it going. And the same thing too as well on social media, all those other things. Bro, just keep posting. Just keep posting. Just keep swimming. It's the same thing. Like again, finding Nemo. Just getting it going. Get that plug in there. Okay. Just keep posting. You want to be bigger. You want to make more money. Post. You want to have more influence. Post. You want to help people. Post. You want to you have to post. Just post. Put things out. Stop worrying about what everybody thinks. Post. Again, you want to help people? Great. Talk to them. Great. Create resources. Create more resources. Create another resource. Create another resource. You got to do, right? You got to do. At the end of the day, everything else that comes in between all those things is all noise. It doesn't matter. Do. Right? Go out and do all those things. No matter what you do, you're going to get criticized. You got to go out and do. This is what it is.
For sure. Yeah.
Mic drop. So, no, for sure. And that's a good place to open up some other things later on as well. But no, I think that's a big piece. And again, I know it's a thing that a lot of people struggle with as well. And then also how we gonna finish up with this prayer. Like get that God light in there to light everybody up and give them some freedom from this. Let's pray it out real quick. Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us here today and all the ways that you are continuing to work and mold our hearts. We're so thankful that you call us to have identity in you and something that can't be taken away from us. And also, too, what a loving source that, again, fills us with confidence and that we can have confidence in who you are, God, and not rely on ourselves or the people around us to give us identity. We ask that you continue to remold, reshape, reconfigure, and reconstruct our hearts, God, so that we can keep our eyes focused on you and your glory and spreading your kingdom. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, until next time, Farm System out.